You're watching Jim Cantelon Today Television. This is Bible Study for the 21st Century. So friends, Jim Cantelon here. We are going through the Gospel of John right now. We're in, or just about to get into John chapter 4, which is another very famous instance of Jesus' conversation with the woman at the well in Samaria. Absolutely fascinating. So we'll take a little break. And when I come back from the break, I want to give you an update on WOW's involvement with Ukraine, which is part of our ministry. And I know you'll enjoy that. But first of all, take a look at this.
For over 20 years, WOW, working for Orphans and Widows, has been caring for vulnerable and at-risk women and children hard hit by the HIV and AIDS pandemic in Africa and India. WOW engages with local partner champions and church-based volunteers in the care of the desperately needy. Now, in recent months, we have expanded our reach to Ukraine. Over 8 million refugees have fled the ravages of that war-torn country, mostly women and children, including many orphans. Our partner in East Europe tells us of the busing of Ukrainian orphans through the night to safety. Churches have become refugee centers, opening their buildings to become safe havens in the rescue. And WOW has come alongside. We have begun supporting this rescue work, but there is so much more that we must provide to these heroic churches. They need funding to continue for hundreds of orphans yet to come. We may be only small players, but you can partner with us in the rescue of Ukrainian orphans. WOW is a proven ministry. We are grateful for your support. Call, write, or log on to wowmission.com and be inspired.
Now, as you know, friends, my wife and I founded a ministry called WOW, Working for Orphans and Widows, 22 years ago. Actually, it'll be 23 years in a few months. It's a ministry that has had a major impact with orphans and widows impacted for the first few decades by HIV and AIDS, and now continue with that, plus COVID-19. In sub-Saharan Africa, we've worked in a number of countries, but our main foci right now are South Africa, Zambia, and Malawi. But we're also involved in southern India, and we have thousands of orphans and widows that we've been caring for in something we call home-based care, right on the scene, mobilizing local churches, local pastors, and their volunteers to provide teams of ministry on a consistent basis to those who are so seriously afflicted. And I'm talking, on the verge of death in most cases by various diseases, the main one being, continuing to be HIV and AIDS. But 10 months ago, Putin invaded Ukraine. And I mentioned that on air, and I made a commitment, working for Orphans and Widows. As you may recall, in those first few months, orphans and widows streaming out of Ukraine, trying to escape the horrible things going on, leaving their husbands and fathers behind, in many cases on the journey becoming orphaned or widowed because the wonderful father, the wonderful husband they left behind had already been killed. But we connected with a network of churches in western Ukraine and also eastern Poland who began to make their churches into refugee centers. So as these streams of orphans and widows were coming out of the war zone, the churches became temporary places of respite and shelter for 2 or 3 days until the buses came to take them into Poland or other countries there. But their big need, as I asked for it, was feeding these people. So even though, we're a small player in a much bigger picture, I said, we will do what we can. And so a lot of you faithful souls, apart from what you're doing to support our work in Africa, began to support our work in Ukraine. And we began to help with the feeding of these orphans and widows. Now, take a look at this. This is a double picture here of two mothers, two widows with young boys, and some of the food that we've been able to supply. They look very happy, and why wouldn't they? You know, we don't realize what we have until we lose it. And if we have any sense of entitlement, you know, it's not a good thing. Let me show you another shot here. This one here. There's a mom with three little ones, and then another with someone in a stroller. And we are doing our best to help these precious people, and we're able to do so because you're helping us to help them. One more pic here. Look at this one. See the joy in the faces. You know, it's not typical of WOW's history, you know, where we're working with African orphans and widows, and now also Indian orphans and widows. I'm going to show you a video next time that was taken by our champions on the ground, working with street orphans and widows in Chennai, southern India. And oh boy, I'll tell you, it's just, the sights of deprivation are enough to make you weep. But by God's grace, you know, instead of cursing the darkness, we're lighting a candle. So, you know, you're supporting us. Now, here's an interesting sidebar to the Ukrainian story. I want to show you this picture right here. I mentioned churches that opened their facilities. You know, their spare Sunday school rooms, their basement rooms, some of their office rooms, and even some of their sanctuaries to this flood of refugees out of the war zone. And many of these churches, you know, would have 60, 50 people, 40 people. This picture here was a bit of a larger church. They had 120 people when the war began, and they opened their facilities to these fleeing orphans and widows. We got involved helping to feed them, but there's far more than 120 in this crowd, as you can see. What the pastors on the ground have told me is that since the war has broken out, and since the church has become active in caring for orphans and widows, they've had phenomenal growth. And so in this case, this congregation here, you're going from 120 to what? Maybe 300, 400 there? There's probably more that the camera hasn't picked up, but all loving Jesus, because Jesus is loving them through his people. And you're a part of that. And we may, you know, be at more than arm's length from Ukraine, but we're there with our financial support. And what we've done, now that the winter is here, and there's not as much of a migration of orphans as there was previously. The need now is for warm clothing, parkas, boots, mittens, toques, blankets, those kinds of things, because millions of Ukrainians are living without electricity, without access to any kind of artificial warmth. And you know from your own experience with wintertime, if you have no heat in your house, you feel it. You may have a roof over your head, thank God for that, but no heat when it's 30, 40 below outside. I mean, it's little wonder some people perish. So what we're doing now with funds that's coming through WOW and JCT for the purposes of Ukraine is we're purchasing warm clothing and blankets and things that will keep people from freezing. I think that makes perfect sense. And I'm coming to you right now in January, so, you know, winter is heavy upon Ukraine. Ukraine is appealing for millions of low wattage light bulbs. I should say low, not wattage, low amperage light bulbs, so that they can have some light without drawing a lot on the electricity that is available through generators. But they really need warm clothing now. So, you know, if you'd like to be a part of that, you know, you'll see on our promos on the program, WOW, and you'll see the coordinates there on the screen. just log on, and the website will lead you to how you can donate. And we will continue to provide your funding to these people through a huge army of local pastors and church volunteers, and make a difference in our world. So there you go. Okay, let's move on here. I'm going to go back to my scriptures, if I can find the beginning of John chapter 4 and my trusty iPad. There we go. Okay, this is a very, very powerful chapter, and I'm going to take my time with it. I won't finish it, this program, by any stretch. But this is the famous instance of Jesus having a conversation with a Samaritan woman at Jacob's well. It's absolutely fascinating. Let me read most of it, depending on our time. And remind me, Florida Direct, this is our first or our second teaching segment? It's our first. Okay, so I can move into the second. Okay. I lose my way sometimes, friends. Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that he was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John, although in fact it was not Jesus who baptized, but his disciples. So he left Judea and went back once more to Galilee. Now he had to go through Samaria. So he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You're a Jew, and I'm a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" For Jews do not associate with Samaritans. Okay. You know, at close to 2,000 years distance, you know, a modern reader is more than out of sync with the historical and cultural context in which this story about Jesus is told. And when it comes to stories within the story, it's even more of a stretch to appreciate the finer points of the narrative. In this case, we got the woman at the well. We've got the Samaritans. We got to say something about Samaritans. We got women talking to men, which was verboten in a public forum. We've got the mountains of Ebal and Gerizim. We've got Jacob's well, and we've got living water, to name a few. That's why I say this chapter is huge. There is so much to cover here. So bear with me, because if you can appreciate the historical, cultural nuances of this story, this fourth chapter of John will just reach out and grab you, and you'll never forget it. And it can make a huge difference in terms of how you see your world and how you see sinners, quotes, and how you see disciples, followers of Jesus, and how you see your world. I mean, it's a powerful chapter. So having said that, I'll take a little break, and after the break I'll come back and we'll get right into the meat of this remarkable fourth chapter of John.
WOW! Working for Orphans and Widows has been caring for orphans and widows in Africa and India for over 20 years. Key to its vision is partnership with local champions who engage hundreds of church-based volunteers in home-based care. Care for the sick and the dying in their own humble homes. They are defenseless and afflicted. They are the least of these that Jesus would have us love and care for. Our partner champions are based in South Africa, Zambia, Malawi, and India. They provide faithful, accountable, and godly care for thousands. Together with WOW, they truly are the hands and feet of Jesus to the sick and the dying. Founder and President Jim Cantelon has been committed to both teaching the gospel via Jim Cantelon Today TV and practicing the gospel through WOW. WOW is a proven ministry. We are grateful for your support. Call, write, or log on to wowmission.com and be inspired.
Okay, so let's get into some of those cultural, historical, finer points that you need to be up to speed on in order to fully appreciate this 4th chapter of John. First of all, it wasn't a taboo, but it was socially frowned upon for a man to talk to a woman, even his wife, in public. There was a well-known rabbinical saying stated, and I'll quote it here: "A man should hold no conversation with a woman in the street, not even with his own wife, still less with any other woman, lest men should gossip," unquote. So it was no surprise that when the disciples returned from Sychar, where they'd been buying some food, to Jacob's well, they marveled that Jesus was talking with a woman. Jesus, unperturbed, gave no explanation or apology for this breach of cultural protocol. And we'll see that when we read it. Then, the fact that he was talking with a Samaritan was even more surprising. The strong antipathy on the part of Jews to Samaritans was captured a few centuries later by another rabbi who said, and I quote him, quote, "He that eats the bread of the Samaritans is like to one that eats the flesh of swine," unquote. I mean, that's pretty bad, right? And it wasn't just the Samaritans' mixed blood due to the resettlement of Samaria with Gentiles by the Assyrians in the 8th century before Christ. But it was also their insistence that Mount Gerizim in Samaria was God's holy mountain and not Mount Zion in Judea. The Samaritan religion was informed exclusively by the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, and religious practice revolved around a temple they had built on Mount Gerizim. Because in Deuteronomy chapter 27, verse 4, Moses had instructed the Israelites to build an altar on Mount Ebal, which faces Gerizim across a valley, but the Samaritans chose Gerizim for their temple because it was the Mount of Blessing, whereas Ebal was the Mount of Cursing. You read that in Deuteronomy chapter 27 and also in Deuteronomy chapter 11. Kathy and I attended a modern Samaritan Passover ceremony on Mount Gerizim a few years ago. And I think I have talked about this in the past. It would take me a good 10 minutes to describe that experience. Boy, was it something else. There's maybe 400 or 500 Samaritans left in the world. They're scattered all over Israel, but they all come on Passover to Mount Gerizim. Each family has a sacrificial lamb. Lambs like I've never seen in my life before. Beautiful, beautiful, perfect lambs with roses woven into their wool. I mean, I've never seen anything like it in my life. And then they've got their high priest, and they have a whole ritual of prayer and the slaughtering, and without a bleat, I might add, of these lambs right in front of us. I mean, we had a little fence between us and this one family lamb, like it was five feet away from us. We're looking at the old priest as he's invoking the presence of God. We turn back to the Samaritans in this enclosure, and every lamb is already dead, without a sound. Anyway, that's something for another time. But when you're there on Mount Gerizim, you look across the valley to Mount Ebal, and you understand why they chose Gerizim over Ebal. Maybe they thought Moses made a mistake, but Ebal looks barren, it looks forbidding, and some would say it looks cursed. Nevertheless, there was rampant racial discrimination between Jews and Samaritans, combined with the Battle of the Holy Mountains, and this precipitated a great gulf fixed between Samaritan and Jew. The Samaritans' blood was not pure, and they had a competing holy mountain, okay? Then, are you with me here? There was Jacob's well. This is the only direct reference. The Old Testament says nothing about it. It is located near Shechem, which is modern-day Nablus. And the tradition with regard to its history is totally dependent on the words of the Samaritan woman when she told Jesus that, quote, "Our father Jacob was the one, quote, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did also his sons and his livestock," unquote. And in her day, as Jesus is there with her, the well is deep, but in our day, over time, debris and detritus have lessened its depth. It's owned today by the Greek Orthodox Church, who oversee the ruins of a 4th century AD church that was built there, and then a 12th century Crusader church built there, ruins on ruins. And Jesus, tired as he was from his journey, sat down by this well, and John tells us it was about noon, and one of the most famous conversations in history was about to take place. Okay, let's pick it up in verse 10. Jesus answered her after she said, "How can you ask me for a drink? You're a Jew, I'm a Samaritan. We shouldn't be talking." Jesus said, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asked you for a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water." "Sir," the woman said, "you have nothing to draw with. The well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well, drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock?" Jesus answered, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming back here to draw water." And he told her, "Go, call your husband and come back." "I have no husband," she replied. Jesus said to her, "You're right when you say you have no husband. The fact is you've had 5 husbands. The man you now have is not your husband. What you've just said is quite true." From time to time, questions arise as to how the gospel writers knew what was being thought or said by the main characters. And this is a case in point. If all the disciples are in Sychar buying food, how can John, give us this record of this conversation? So some commentators assume that the writer is composing a historical novel, doing due diligence in terms of his own recollections and his research. Others see it in terms of speculation and even presumption. Some dismiss the narratives as outright fiction, fueled by religious ideology and enthusiasm. Regardless, there are commentators whose conjectures are biased in terms of anti-supernaturalism, and on the other extreme, those who regard the scriptures almost bordering on bibliolatry, that is the worship of the Bible, which of course is not a good thing. So, as to the conversation between Jesus and the Samaritan woman at Jacob's well in the absence of the disciples, my view is that Jesus later recounted to John, who would have looked askance at later critiques, who gave the record as Jesus told him. And I'll leave that, but there are 3 components to the conversation. Living water, verses 7 to 5, true worship, verses 19 to 24, and Jesus' uncharacteristic claim to messiahship. And I say uncharacteristic claim because he was usually silent on that count, at least with anyone outside of the inner circle of the disciples. So, if there had been a bucket or a rope, Jesus would have or could have drawn water for himself. He didn't, but the woman did. Obviously, she brought it with her, so he asked her for a drink. She was surprised that a Jew would ask a Samaritan for water, but Jesus bluntly stated, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asked you for a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water." Which seems a bit harsh, right? But it may have been a response to a touch of sarcasm on the woman's part. Tone often meets tone in conversation. And then again, John was not taking dictation when Jesus recounted the conversation. This is probably a summary, and there may have been more that was said than he records. The fact that she didn't respond to his mild rebuke may suggest that Jesus made the comment, as they say in the music, sotto voce, softly, soft voice, more to himself than to her. Anyway, she did respond to the living water reference. It couldn't come from the well, for Jesus had nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Well water is just water, right? So she would have thought living water to be running water from a stream. So a bit more sarcasm. "Are you greater than our father Jacob?" She was beginning to think this stranger at the well had a high opinion of himself. The gift of God didn't appeal to her, but she was intrigued with this living water thing. She was also skeptical. "Sir, give me this water, that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming back to draw water. Could be interpreted, yeah, right, tell me another one. So it's what followed that changed everything. And now I'll get to that. Let me take a little break right now, and then we'll have more time to talk about what followed. So take a look at this, and I'll be right back.
WOW! Working for Orphans and Widows is a trusted Christian charity reaching out to the sick and the dying, the least of these in pandemic-stricken Africa and India. For over 22 years, Jim and Kathy Cantelon have engaged with community-based champions and church volunteers in the care for those whom Jim calls society's weakest link. Everything from home-based palliative care to the rescue and protection of young women and girls who are victims of abuse is done in the name of Jesus and is overseen by local partner champions and an army of church-based volunteers. WOW has a proven track record. Check it out on wowmission.com, or if you wish, you can call or write to us. Its sustainability is dependent on the support of faithful friends like you.
As I say, it's what followed this repartee between the woman and Jesus, and the sarcasm in her voice and tone, responding to tone and all of that. It's what follows that changes everything when Jesus refers to her serial monogamies, 5 husbands, and to her current live-in arrangement, where, with a bit of regret, I think, for her skepticism, she says, "Sir, I can see that you are a prophet." I'm going to leave it there, and next program I'm going to pick it up from there in verse 19 of John chapter 4. But friends, you need to take some time with this. This is a powerful conversation. If you want a little help with it, Cantelon's Casual Commentary will help you. Just log on to Cantelon's Casual Commentary. All the retailers, booksellers have it. It's available in hardcover, 520 pages, Matthew, Mark, Luke, Acts, and John. Also paper book and also ebook. But I wrote it for you. It can help you with this. But regardless, spend some time in John chapter 4. It is a real gripper. And you learn something here that you maybe learn nowhere else. And I'll be stressing some of that when we come back next program. But until then, friends, remember, it's all about Jesus. That's why we're doing what we're doing. And I hope it's impressing you positively.